Hello, Chair. The meeting is now live.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Health and Overview and Scrutiny panel. I'm Councillor Mark Jeffrey, Chair of the Health and Overview and Scrutiny panel. I'd like to welcome members to the first HOSP meeting of the municipal year, and particularly welcome any new councillors to HOSP. So members of the public are invited to view this meeting online. Those present are requested to keep their microphones on mute and to only turn them on when you are called to speak. Members are requested to keep your cameras turned on at all times. Officers and external presenters are requested to turn your cameras on only when you are presenting your reports or answering questions. So members have read the reports, so presenters, please just highlight any developments that have occurred since publication. That means that we have more time then to ask questions. So I was just talking beforehand about what the remit of the Health and Overview and Scrutiny panel is, and it's really about scrutinising the health and social care sector to improve outcomes for patients. And the catchment area is Portsmouth City, and then surrounding area, so half of East Hampshire, Gosport, Havant and Fareham. I thought I'd just say that before the start of the meeting. Councillors, if you'd like to speak, please either put your hand up in chat or write your name and RTS in the chat function. So I would now like to introduce, members, if that's all right. So Stuart, you're going to be first. So Councillor Stuart Brown.
Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Stuart Brown, Liberal Democrat, representing Fratton Ward in Portsmouth.
Councillor Graham Heaney.
I'm Councillor Graham Heaney, and I'm a Labour councillor for St Jude Ward.
And we've got Councillor Leonie Oliver, but I think she's running late, so she'll join us later. Councillor Judith Smythe.
Councillor Judith Smythe, St Jude Ward. Councillor.
Councillor David Evans. Has he joined us yet?
No, I don't believe he's here.
No, so he's from East Hampshire District Council. He's nominated from there. Councillor Anne Briggs. Don't think we've got at the moment. We also had Councillor Martin Pepper. I know he's here.
Yeah, I'm a councillor for Gosport Borough Council. Thank you.
And we've got apologies from two councillors. That's Councillor Matthew Atkins and Councillor Julie Richardson from Havant Borough Council. So are there any other apologies that people have given to anyone here? No? Okay. So I'm going to take any declarations of interest and ask if anyone has any declarations of interest. Councillor Graham Heaney?
Yeah, it's not a declaration, it's a question actually. I noticed on the agenda paper we have the list of membership. We also have vacancy. Is that a vacancy for another council or? So
Fareham Council can nominate someone, but they've decided not to nominate anyone this year so far. So we're sending them the agenda, and actually I'm going to contact the leader of the council and just say that if he wants to raise anything, he's more than welcome to send an email to me if they don't want to send anyone.
Okay, thanks.
So declarations of interest? No. Okay. So with everyone's permission, I'd like to change the running order of the agenda slightly today, just by moving up agenda item 7, which is adult social care update. And put
Sorry, Chair. Sorry, we've also got the minutes of the previous meetings. Sorry, to jump in.
I was going to do that after this, but
sorry.
Let's do it now. Let's do it now. So I hope you've read the minutes from the previous meeting. Does anyone have any things that come up from that at all? Any errors or anything like that? Can we propose and second the minutes as a record?
Yeah, I'll propose.
Thank you. Seconder? Am I allowed to second?
I'll second it for you, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Great, okay. So Yes, I'll be changing the running order of the agenda slightly today. I'm moving the agenda item 7, which is the adult social care update, after the ambulance service update, as Andy Biddle has another meeting to attend. I hope that's okay with everyone. Okay, so agenda item 4 is the South Central Ambulance Service, and we've got Tracy Redmond today. So Tracy, could you give us a brief summary of your report, and then members will ask questions.
Thank you, Chair. Afternoon all. We'll take the report as read as described, but just in terms of the geography, my remit is to cover this area of SCAS. SCAS, as you will know, runs up to Milton Keynes, and there are 7 areas, of which Portsmouth, South East Hampshire is one area. Just in terms of overview, we continue to work extremely hard with partners across the system with regards to making sure that our patients get the right care that they need in the right place at the right time. And we've done a lot of work with being able to not take patients to ED, because that's not often the right place for them. We're doing a lot of work signposting patients to a wide range of community services, as well as non-ED locations within the hospital, to ensure that they get early treatment straight away for their needs. In addition, this supports the flow within the ED department, which we know continues to be a challenge. In terms of demand, SCAS demand has fluctuated over the last few months, and continues to do so, really impacted by a number of things. At the moment, we're in hot weather. That always changes the dynamic slightly with demand. And with regards to performance, we are currently able to attend our most poorly patients within an appropriate time frame, but we do struggle to get to some of our less poorly patients as quickly as we would like to, and continue to work on that. With regards to the current status within SCAS, we're currently at REAP level 3, which is the national framework to ascertain the pressure on the services. REAP 3 is described as severe pressure. We have been in REAP 2 over the last few weeks, but went to REAP 3 last week due to an increase in demand and pressure. We continue with our transformation review, looking at where we've got our resources, what resources we've got, and how best to reuse them to be most efficient and effective. In terms of our challenges, we do continue to work with Portsmouth hospitals with regards to handover delays. You'll see from the chart there, it's not been a great start to the year with regards to handover delays. Having said that, June has seen some significant improvements, so we look to see now how we can continue to work together to sustain some of those improvements. With regards to the SCAS improvement plan, that's clearly an ongoing piece of work, but we've had significant focus in particular around safeguarding and incident reporting, so that we can make sure that our patients and our staff are safe, and that incidents that need investigating are done so to make sure that we continue to learn and improve. We are doing a lot of work with our teams around culture and well-being, and a recognition that clearly if we look after our staff, then they are the best placed people to look after our patients in the best possible way. We've got some new processes in place with regards to governance and leadership to make sure that there's oversight of key areas, and there's lots of additional training and development for staff to make sure that we are safe and providing the best service we can, including encouraging staff to speak up so that we continue to learn from our staff and from our service users. Just in terms of more recently, we have a new chief executive in post within SCAS now. So we are seeing a renewed energy within the organisation. We're working in some significant financial constraints going through into this year, which I think is commonplace across the NHS, unfortunately, at the moment. And we've got a new 10-point plan in place, which takes us back to the basics of making sure that what we're doing is safe, the quality of care that we're providing is the best, and we're looking after our staff going through that. We'll continue to do that. We'll continue to work through our improvement plan and our 10-point plan. We will continue to make sure that our patients get what they need, where they need it, and when they need it. And we know we've got work to do, in particular with our lower acuity patients, in terms of getting a timely response to them or getting the right advice to them as sooner than we currently do. And that's what we're working on at the moment.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Graham Heaney.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. Thank you for that overview. Given the huge pressure on the service, are you having any significant issues in relation to retention of staff and recruitment of new staff?
We do. It's not new. The retention challenge. Our paramedics are now so well trained that everybody else wants them. We've got paramedics that go and work in primary care. It's a great opportunity for them. It changes work-life balance, all those kind of things. They're not riding around in the rain in the middle of the night. So you can see the attraction. I mean, it's a bit of a double-edged sword because some of them come back. We do some rotational work with our primary care colleagues, so paramedics can rotate in and out, share the learning across. But retention is a challenge. And the cost of living in the SCAS patch, not necessarily so much down here, is high compared to other areas of the UK. So people who want to join the ambulance service, the cost of living is a challenge as well in terms of recruitment. We have just recruited some international paramedics from Australia, New Zealand and Tunisia. They arrived with us in the last couple of weeks. And again, that's a national programme. All ambulance services are doing international recruitment at the moment, which is proven to be successful, actually. So we're just looking at all different avenues, really.
Thank you. I've got a question, if I may. Would it be possible? So at the end of the report, the summary, it's really encouraging that the ambulance service have remained at or near the best in the class against other ambulance trusts. Would it be possible in the reports to have perhaps a table that sort of shows that or demonstrates that, so that we could actually see that on an ongoing basis? Would that be possible?
Certainly, yeah. I will include that in my next report if that's helpful.
Okay, thank you. And also the other thing it was related. So the other thing is that with the performance data, so I know that we've got things like year to date, and but we don't have anything over a longer period. And I just wondered whether I think it would be helpful for us to see how that compares to, say, 5 years ago, for example. Or 10 years ago, if these organisations were around then.
They were, but I'm happy to go back as far as I can find data. All I would say is it's a very different landscape, even than 5 years ago, in terms of the demands, the types of demands. Our capabilities are significantly different to we used to pick people up and take them to hospital, and now that's almost the last thing we do is we explore all the other appropriate avenues. So I'm happy to do that, but I'm not sure it would be an equal comparison, if you like.
No, but then it's up to us to draw out that. So if you could, that would be helpful as well for me, anyway.
Of course.
Thank you.
No problem.
Councillor Judith Smythe.
One of the things that used to exercise me when I was chair of the Health Authority many moons ago is the number of people who are turning up at A&E who really shouldn't be there. Quite a lot has been done since then, but I wondered if you could give us any assessment of how far what the whole system has been doing to prevent people going to A&E unnecessarily, including the PR work, including having the, in Portsmouth's case and in Petersfield's case, certainly the alternative non-emergency provision, direct access. Have they had any effect on that number, or are we still facing a need to do a lot more on preventing people going to A&E when their life is not in danger?
A lot has been done. I think, as you've described, there has been a lot of media PR work, and that's ongoing. There's a campaign, I understand, going ahead through the summer as well around that. We have got the treatment centres at Gosport, St Mary's and Petersfield, and we do signpost people wherever we can from SCAS, and I know even when people turn up at ED, sometimes they're sent off, you need to go to Petersfield or whatever. There's more work to do, I think it's fair to say, and I think there's more work in terms of public understanding of what's available and what they can access in terms of the walk-in demand into ED. I think Joe's probably got something to add.
Yeah, happy to pick up in my report, but Judith, I think it is, as Tracy said, definitely still a work in progress. I think particularly locally we had seen some gains pre-COVID, and we had managed growth quite well in Portsmouth and South East Hampshire around ED demand. And actually, when you look nationally, our ED attendance demand is quite good, proportionate to the population size. So that means we don't necessarily see people as many people attending unnecessarily. But what we do continue to struggle with in the area is the admissions. So the people, when people do attend, they do need to be admitted. So a lot of work going on with community services and the hospital itself around how do we intervene earlier and again use those alternative pathways to support people in their community without admission, or to do that in a same day emergency care type environment. And I think the UTCs that we do have in this patch, because we're quite well served in Portsmouth and South East Hampshire, perhaps compared to North and Mid Hampshire, the UTCs have supported us in seeing that that sort of reduced growth, if you like, in demand for ED attendances for people who don't necessarily need to be there. Having said that, post-COVID, we are still seeing an increase in that, more probably this year than we have in previous years, where we're seeing more people who perhaps could have been serviced elsewhere. So whereas previously it was an emergency admission issue, people needed to be admitted and we were tackling that, we are now starting to see an increase in people attending ED who could perhaps have gone to the UTCs. And again, demand on primary care and the UTC is probably pushing some of that as well.
Just to comment on that, I think that there are, and I get this in my work as a counsellor very much and talking to friends and neighbours, I think there's several groups in society that need some different sorts of communication from the NHS, particularly regarding ambulances, but also this would apply to Joe's area of work too. The faith in ambulances coming, the faith in GPs when you get a problem is very, very low among some sectors of society. And I do suspect that is causing, in the long term, more distress and possibly raising mortality in some areas. So we do need to look at that. I think there is also a group of people who simply can't get through to the GP and who then resort to the to hospitals, which that's not the purpose. The UTC is a better thing, but even then you can face astronomical waiting times. Having said that, my husband was taken up on a blue light sent up on blue light by the GP last week, and he had absolutely fantastic care, no waiting, analysis done. And I shall be spreading that news around my neighbours, because I think there's a kind of gloom and doom discussion that goes on with lots of people that is probably unsafe, actually. And our experience last week was, I would say, absolutely perfect. And he's fine now. It was a genuine reason to go. The GP sent him up, but after the analyses have been done, it's all fine. So I think there's some new messaging needing, is what I've said, and it's a joint messaging probably between Joe's area and Tracy's.
Thank you. Joe?
Sorry, Chair. I didn't introduce myself when I spoke. So used to come into us, but I'm Jo York, Place Director for Portsmouth from the ICB, and a joint role with the City Council. And as Judith said, I can pick up, particularly in my report, some of the issues around GP access and also what we're doing in the area around communications as well.
Thank you. Tracy, you had your hand up. Do you still want to speak?
I was just going to say, actually, it's nice to hear patient stories as Judith has described, because actually, I think if you are very unwell, there is no delay. You are in the right place and you get sorted out. And I think it's important to recognise that we are still, as I say, certainly for our most poorly patients, we are all still giving a great service across the whole system.
Thank you. I've actually
Please make sure that's recorded in the minutes then briefly, because as I say, it wasn't us who decided to go to any, it was the GP who sent him, and all is well. And we were impressed, because I'm also analytical about local NHS services, and I know that's not been everybody's experience.
No, I've written down here as well. Thank you to all the staff for their performance. If it's amongst the best in the country, so if that's written down as well, please. Anyone else? No? Okay, thank you very much, Tracy. You don't have to stay if you don't want to. Thank you for your report and coming today.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye. So now we're going to agenda item 5, which will be Andy Biddle. So Andy, could you introduce yourself and tell us who you are and a brief summary of your report, and then we've got members' questions, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. I'm Andy Biddle. I'm the Director of Adult Social Care at Portsmouth City Council. The report's in front of you. I'd highlight a few bits for interest. So in section 4, we've talked about the changes that we've seen in proposed legislation and guidance in recent times. We did have, as of last calendar year, a lot of transformation work that we're being requested to do by central government, and some of those measures, some of those changes have been deferred, particularly the care cap that will be of concern to people that pay for their own care. And I'd also pick out the liberty protection safeguards that were due to be implemented originally in 2020, but now it won't be implemented in the course of this Parliament, which deals with people that may have some mental incapacity in making certain decisions. So it's quite an important piece of legislation and guidance. We still do have deprivation of liberty safeguards, and I'd emphasise the last S of that, the safeguards, in terms of our obligations to think about how we work with people that may suffer from a lack of mental capacity. In section 5, I've talked about the fusion project that's happening across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight at the moment to provide a single community and mental health trust for the NHS, and I suspect Alistair, when he comes onto his paper, will probably pick up on that. But there is a paper on fusion, the fusion project, going to the Health and Wellbeing Board next week, which is also held in public, so there'll be more detail and discussion there. We've had some very positive results under section 6.2 in terms of our waiting list for assessment. That's in our adults care and support service, which works with residents over 18 who don't have specifically a learning disability or a mental health issue. And so is the bulk of the work that we do, and we've seen those waiting lists quite significantly reduced. That we still have waiting lists, which we'd rather not, but it's a really positive effort on behalf of our staff and our managers to get those lists down. I don't know if any of you saw yesterday, but there was a report published by the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services that said that across the country we've seen waiting lists for assessment and support reduced from around about 500,000 to around about 430,000. Still too many, but certainly we're sort of mirroring the national reduction. And we're really pleased that we're now monitoring and alerting when we're seeing anyone who's waiting more than 12 weeks for support, whereas we were looking at 6 months previously. So there's some positives there. In terms of hospital discharge under section 6.3, the costs around discharge to assess, which is the way that we've been working since COVID guidance and then latterly coming out of the main COVID pandemics, may have an impact on us this year, and we're also doing a review of our reablement and rehabilitation services, another important piece of work this year that's connected to hospital discharge. Under 6.5, a particularly positive use of social media, reaching out to our carers, unpaid carers, the backbone of care in the community, eclipsing both the NHS and social care in the work that they do. And certainly we couldn't manage as a health and care system without our unpaid carers. So we're always trying to identify more carers, offer as much support as we can, and be fully cognizant of the role that they fulfil, their irreplaceable role. Under 6.8, we're doing some work in our management information service to ensure more accurate and timely data returns and to prepare for the social care assurance stroke inspection process that was commenced by the Care Quality Commission in April of this year. So quite a lot of work to get our data into the place it needs to be. Under 6.9, a real success in that we now have an integrated discharge to assess unit in Portsmouth. It's on the first floor of one of our nursing homes, Harry Sotnick House. It's been an ambition for the City Council and for our previously CCG and now ICB partners and our Solent colleagues for a long time to have an integrated unit that looks both at health and care needs and helps people have the right place to land when they come out of hospital. So that's a real positive. On 7.3, the panel requested an update on the Stroke Association contract, which there's been some commentary and discussion about in the last few months across Portsmouth. Understandably, it's a change within Portsmouth. So I've included a paragraph there. The contract is one of a range of support that's available to Portsmouth residents, and what we've emphasised really is they'll continue to be support available to Portsmouth residents who've experienced a stroke and their families. But there's no source of recurrent funding to continue that particular contract. The contract's been extended within this calendar year, so it won't end until December of this year. Originally it was due to end this month in June. And we've extended that period. We found some short-term money to extend that period to work with the Stroke Association to make sure, one, that the communication is available and spread widely around what services are available for those people who've experienced a stroke. But also, if we've got some people that are using that service currently, any of our residents, if they have eligible needs for health and care support, that we're making sure that those needs are met.
So we'll start with welcome.
Under 7.5, we've set out some of the challenges in responding to our residents who need an assessment under the Mental Health Act. These are often those of our residents that are in really desperate circumstances, very distressed, and maybe at risk of harming themselves, and in a small minority of cases harming others. We are having some struggles and challenges at the moment to respond in a timely way, in the way that we'd like, with an assessment and potential detention in hospital. And we've escalated that to our corporate governance group within the council. And of course, as you'd expect, of working with our NHS partners to try and make sure we're taking the right decisions despite the pressure and the difficulty in resources. 7.6 has set out some of the demand and capacity challenges in our work in safeguarding. Again, a really vital and statutory area that we work in. And in section 8, we've set out the strategy on a page that governs the work that adult social care is doing over the next couple of years. What we've tried to do is talk about aspirations and strategy, but then link that to individual pieces of work that we're doing so that we can see that those are going to make a difference to people. In section 9, we put out a bit more detail about the inspection process that adult social care will be subject to as of this year and going forward by the Care Quality Commission. And in 9.3, we've set out some of the work that we undertake around quality insurance and working with providers of care in Portsmouth locally. Finally, in section 10, we've set out some of the work around internal governance to make sure that however we're working, the risks that we're seeing, challenges that we have, those are communicated widely and shared, but also that we're clear on successes. We're clear on any adverse incidents that we've noted them, learned from them and prepared action plans around them. And so the broad way that we work to ensure the service is well governed. That's a very brief summary of the report, but of course happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. So, councillors? questions? Oh, that was very almost a tie, but I first came up as Councillor Graham Heaney.
Sorry, Judith, picked you just the post there. Sorry about that. I had two questions about the legislation. You mentioned the diversion of liberty standards being unfit and the new system not coming in. Why have they decided not to bring this in? Because you suggest that there is a potential risk to us for it not being brought in. And it seems a bit unfair that we're going to have to carry that risk rather than the government. So what's the reason for not bringing that in?
Originally, we didn't get a reason. So this was in this year. We had a note from the Department of Health and Social Care that they weren't going to implement LPS within the course of this Parliament. What we then had was something called Next Steps, Putting People at the Heart of Care. So it was an update on a white paper the government published in December 2021 that talked about what the government's framing as their reform of social care. And when that was published, there was another note came out that said one of the reasons that LPS had been deferred was that the Department of Health and Social Care was focusing their available resources on implementing the Next Steps paper. So all that we've heard really is a lack of resource. I think there is still a risk for LPS. I think the main thing we're concerned, there is still a risk that we haven't got LPS. I think the main thing that we're concerned about is that the liberty protection safeguards would have applied to people who live in their own homes. It also would have applied to younger people. So we would have had a more comprehensive system to pick up potential deprivations of liberty. Whereas currently, for example, with people that are living in their own home, if we become aware of a deprivation of liberty, we need to apply to the court to gain authorisation for that, as opposed to go through an assessment process locally. And we know the courts have a huge amount of work to do and are still working through backlogs in terms of COVID. We haven't had any indication at all whether whether liberty protection safeguards will be picked up again in the next Parliament. So it's a bit of a wait and see. We may see something published by either political party in the run up to the next general election, but there's nothing that we're hearing at the moment to indicate.
Okay,
thank you.
I had two other questions actually. One was again on legislation. You talked in 6.3 about the fact that we're no longer required to carry out long-term health and care needs assessments. Now, that might be seen as a good thing, i.e. less bureaucracy and paperwork, but is a practical effect of that we're not having the capacity to do what's necessary to support someone who may have long-term health needs? What's your view of that? I wasn't quite clear what the impact of that might be.
It's really mixed, I think. So the reason for removing, and that was removed in the Health and Care Act of 2022, the same act that created the integrated care systems, integrated care boards and integrated care partnerships. The reason that the government gave for removing that was because they wanted all local areas to move very much to a discharge to assess rather than assess to discharge. So a proportionate assessment for someone leaving hospital and then a longer term view of their needs ongoing when they're outside of hospital. It's mixed because it's the right thing to do. Getting people out of hospital as quickly as possible is absolutely the right thing to do. But it's also difficult because for some people they will need a longer term option before they come out of hospital. And it also, the more people that come out, you've got the same resource to carry out those assessments. So you're often playing catch up in trying to carry out those assessments. And we've had difficulty in getting to people in reasonable time. So for example, if somebody's discharged and their needs are met in a care home in the short term, unless we get to them in a reasonably timely way, they get settled into that care home, their needs are met in that care home, and that can be really difficult to then get them back to a level of independence where they can continue living in their own home. So there's a huge benefit there because we all agree, I think, that nobody should stay in hospital for longer than they need to. But there's also a risk in terms of the knock-on resources. We are working very closely with our ICB colleagues, CCG as was, in Portsmouth, and we do have a funded scheme to work with people from a discharge to assess perspective, but we've still got some recruitment issues in that area, and we've got some work to do this year to understand how that plays out, because previously there was a national fund for discharge to assess, That's now absorbed into local budgets, and as we know, there's significant financial challenges at the moment in the area. I hope that answers your question. It's a bit waffly, sorry.
No, that's really helpful. I do want to ask some questions about the stroke service, but I'm conscious I don't want to hog the thing, so I'll be happy to let Judith come in and then maybe come back, because I have a few questions about the stroke service, so I'll pause there.
Thank you, Councillor Graham-Heaney. Councillor Judith Smythe.
I'll leave my question about the stroke service till after he's come in then, but the other questions, just to pick up on something that was answered, Andy, you answered about the dolls situation. Can we carry on with high standard of protection even if the government don't re-legislate? I mean, it's clearly a dereliction of duty that they're leaving this, because having worked a lot in mental health, you can't just stop doing this. We're going to have court cases against us. Can we carry on with good practice regardless?
I think we can. I think the legislation and guidance not being fit for purpose is still an issue, and my main concern is still those people that are living in their own homes. We don't have an automatic process, because it's very much the case, and this comes from the Human Rights Act, that if you're going to be deprived of your liberty, there has to be a formal official process for that to happen. I mean, we often see it happening when people are committed to prison for crimes they've committed, but it should be exactly the same if you've got mental incapacity and we're keeping you somewhere you might not want to be. I think the quality of practice in Portsmouth is good. I think we do have some work to do on our knowledge and implementation of the Mental Capacity Act, which is where DOL sits at the moment. But I think quality of practice is generally good. It's not going to do the things we wanted it to do. And LPS was originally drafted by the Law Commission. They did a review of the Mental Capacity Act. They made recommendations. The majority of those were accepted by the government as being sensible, good practice. And it was a tailor-made piece of legislation, really, and the code of practice was the point we were at when the government deferred it in making sure that worked. So I think there is good practice, because that's based on the way that people practice individually. I think there is still a risk that we won't be able to mitigate. I think the vulnerability of local authorities to judicial review and other legal processes is still there, because there are significant backlogs of deprivation of liberty safeguards assessments. There was a case that was reported on last week. I think it was Surrey, but my apologies to Surrey if I'm doing them a disservice, where there was such a significant level of deprivation of liberty safeguards assessments outstanding that the judicial review had directed them they needed to deal with that. That's going to be very difficult for them because it's a resources issue. So we still have a lack, I think, and we can't mitigate it.
I hope we can keep an eye on that, because it is actually a kind of corner of this that's very extremely important, and we need to keep on top of it and keep campaigning government to do the right thing.
Absolutely.
Because they can't just leave it and think it's an unimportant thing. Okay, my next thing was just a minute. I've got made a little note. Yes, the stroke update I'll do later, but there's another couple of things. I love your strategy on one page. That's the one area of the report where I'm comforted that you're looking at outcomes, which is, of course, great. But I do think
no, I wasn't picking on you.
I was hoping there's somebody talking. It's not my end.
Sorry, my apologies. I share an office.
Oh, okay. The other thing is that that you're reporting here to us, and your report was very interesting, and I was very comforted by some of the things that you've said. Most of the things that you said, actually, I'm familiar with the field, but I wish you would have included a few outcomes. What you're doing is reassuring to most of us who've been around some time, but we must start having a bit more reflection of what's the feedback from the public and what are the outcomes for people who are getting services, even if it's just a sentence at the bottom of several paragraphs, because your report was great and reassuring, but it didn't really reassure me, because I don't know if the outcomes are better. And I'm particularly interested also in the experience of people needing social care and the health social care interface that you manage, about their faith in the service. So that would be helpful. And then last, just to segue into Graham's question, My question about the Stroke Association update is, I get asked quite a lot of questions about this. It's something where there's a lot of anxiety, quite a bit of our emails are on this subject, and I don't come out of this report being able to explain to people what's actually going on. I want to know what's going to close, how far will people have to travel, how people are going to be told about where to go for services. And what I'm hearing from people is there will be no stroke service. People have to travel miles. This is a disaster. And what we need to know as councillors is certainly, well, we need to be reassured ourselves, is that there is going to be a service. Having had a mother with a stroke for a very long time, without the stroke service, we would have absolutely buckled as a family, relatively young family. And I mean, it says they still have access to stroke service provided to the health service. So where would they go? Who would they talk to? How will they know? And also it says that, I don't know the geography well enough. Where would they go? Is the voluntary sector playing a part still? In which case, where? I think there's a piece of work to be done to reassure not just me, but others, that the stroke service is, there will be a stroke service and what it'll be. And my last question, just the very last one, was about the creation of a new mental health trust, or is it a mental health service integrated across the patch? Having been involved with Southern Health Board, the relationships we've built up with local authorities are absolutely crucial. Do we feel in Portsmouth, particularly where we've got a lot of integrated services and work very hard on that, but we're going to lose out if we have an even larger mental health trust?
Thank you. Can we just keep to one topic and then we'll come back for a separate question? So
that's my last one.
No, that's okay. And Andy, you've got both of those. Are you okay answering both of those?
Yes, of course, no problem. So in terms of the outcomes, yes, we can certainly include a lot more feedback, and I take the point. I think because we come to HOSP every 6 months, it's always been a very generic update of what's happened since the last report, and we were talking informally about restructuring this. So we can, we do surveys, we have interaction with our residents that we work with, so we can and we'll adjust the report to reflect that. In terms of the Stroke Association, if someone needs an acute service, as in they've just had one.
Do you want to ask Graham his question first? Because then you'll get the... But my question is about Fusion and about the new trust.
So Fusion, okay, so the new trust, so this was when the ICB came into being in July of last year. They conducted a piece of work that they got external support with as to whether there should be a single community, as in physical health and mental health trust across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. Currently we have Southern Health, we have Solent, who are the main providers there. We have the Isle of Wight Trust, and we have some support from across the border with one of the partnership trusts, in Sussex. So that's a piece of work that's been going on for, since 1st July, I guess, and it will be a single trust. So I can't really put a lot of detail on that because I haven't been involved in the discussions or negotiations around that. There are various clinical groups set up between Southern Health and Solent, and they're working together to come to the formation of a new trust, but it is a single trust across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight for community services, both in terms of physical health and in terms of mental health. In terms of the integrated relationships, we've been working and seeking assurance from our colleagues in Solent because that's who we have a very close relationship with, but we've also had discussion with colleagues in Southern Health, and what the strong message that's come across at this point is that Portsmouth's model of integration is something that's valuable, that people wouldn't wish to see disappear or disintegrate if we talk about integrated and disintegration. And so we're working with our colleagues in Solent particularly to gain assurance of that, to assure ourselves of what the future looks like. And there'll be a report on Fusion coming to the Health and Wellbeing Board next Wednesday that talks in a bit more detail about that.
I mean, the key thing, it's partly answered my question. The key thing is that the ICB, which includes Portsmouth, needs to be commissioning that to happen, and practitioners on the ground need to be talking to those who commission them about what works and what doesn't work. And it's kind of all, we've had a history in Portsmouth of saying our model works, and I think on the whole I agree with that, having been a health commissioner here. But, you know, that doesn't guarantee it will happen, because the greater majority of people living in Netherwallop and Andover and places doesn't sometimes persuade commissioners to do otherwise. So I do hope that you're doing both roles in a very integrated way. And I suppose that's a message to everybody at this board. We have to do both if we're going to make it happen.
What I'm going to do next is I've got Joe York and also Alistair Snell, who I think want to come back on to help respond to that. And then we'll go to Councillor Graham Heaney to talk about your questions, and then Councillor Stuart Brown for questions. So, Joe, do you want to go first?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Chair. And I'll let Alistair pick up with the detail, because there's a lot of work going on and being put into the business case around the merge, the creation of the new trust. But certainly from an ICB perspective, just to assure you, we are, although the ICB does have that commissioning function, of course, that strategic commissioning function, we are trying to work in more partnership ways with all of our partners and providers than perhaps we were able to do in the CCG. So we're doing this very much in partnership with Solent and Southern and the other trusts, but we are absolutely looking at that strategic commissioning direction, and integration is a very key part of that. So hopefully to reassure you, but I'll let Alistair pick up some of the detail.
Alistair, do you want to introduce yourself?
Certainly. Hello, everyone. Alistair Snell, Chief Operating Officer at Solent NHS Trust. There's an awful lot of work going on in the Fusion work stream, as you can imagine, bringing all the trusts together. We're actually in the middle of a 6-week comprehensive engagement exercise with all the staff of the trust and our partners in the system. We're working out what might be the best structure and form for the organisation, more importantly, the function. We absolutely recognise the importance of place, and that different cities and demographics require different levels of services and input. And we've seen that over the years, that the cities invest different amount of money into different specialisms for that reason, and we don't want to lose that. We absolutely recognise, both as a trust and as a system, there is real best practice happening in Portsmouth, and our integrated services are a real map for moving that forwards. And Joe and myself have regular conversations about how we can make sure we hold on to that. And we're really working closely to design the organisation based on that. I think it could be a real positive move for the system, because where there is unwarranted variation, where there is best practice, we can bring that to all the areas of the entire system. It's not about levelling down, it's about levelling up where we can and learning from each other.
Can I just ask a quick question related to this, just to really quickly jump in, because I wrote down when I saw that, how can we measure whether the services might get worse for people in our area? So it's great, we want some services to improve everywhere, of course we do, but actually our remit is our area. So I'd like to know how we can have some figures perhaps on things like that. Is that possible?
Absolutely. There is a sea of data and metrics about access, about quality already there, and they will continue to be monitored in the same way. I'm not expecting any change to frontline provision as a result of Fusion in the very near future. If there is anything, it'll be long-term transformation. We have 10 clinical work streams as a system with things like CAMS or neurodiversity and primary care, etc., where they will be clearly defining outcomes and benefits realisation of that. When we're in that, I'm more than happy to include some key dashboards that we'll be using in these papers, if that would provide assurance to yourselves.
Thank you.
Can I jump in on this topic very quickly? There are two things to say, really. Is there a plan to separate out mental health services from community health services?
There is no plan to separate community services from mental health services. We're going to have one trust as we are now. The future structure of the organisation hasn't been designed yet. That's why we're doing the engagement now, to work out what would be the best. I understand that Southern Health's current structure is divisional based, where they have physical and mental health services under one division. Solent currently have a mental health service line, and we need to work together to understand what would be best for our patients and for clinical leadership moving forward, and we don't have that quite yet.
I think this is extremely difficult for you. I spent several years wrestling with exactly this when I was on the board of Southern Health. I do think we need to be really, really careful and watch the figures and have some way of monitoring, because Southern Health, one could argue, was too big to provide a unified service across the patch. And I'd be happy to talk about that at length if required, and to create an even bigger trust when so many of the community health services, certainly, and to some extent mental health, rely on local relationships that can tweak the model and indeed challenge standards. So, I mean, I wish you well, but please look at outcomes to measure what's happening, because that's what we try very hard to do in Southern Health. And frankly, Southern Health was too big. I'm a bit worried this is too big.
Thank you. Okay, that's good. Okay, so I'm going to go on to Councillor Graham Heaney. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I asked Mark when we came if we could have this item on the agenda, because I've had a couple of emails from people, plus also some of my council colleagues who are asking me about it in my role as a shadow spokesperson for the health and social care. So I did have some more detailed questions about this contract. I mean, I haven't had a chance to speak to Healthwatch, but haven't had a chance to speak to the Stroke Association, because I've been up to my neck in end of year marketing at the university, which has taken up a lot of my time. But in relation to the contract, I'm a bit puzzled about how this works, because I would like a bit more detail. Is this a fixed term contract or a rolling contract? Is my first question. Secondly, I'm puzzled about the way it's been funded, or what's been described as being funded. Has it always been funded out of underspends on BCF, or did it have money allocated to it and then there were problems and it therefore got shifted to that? Because it seems to me that if you're doing a contract with the voluntary sector organisation, one of the things that's key is having some stability of funding, because the voluntary sector is a bit fragile, to say the least. And when we're doing contracts, we don't really want to leave them in a situation where we say, "Oh, sorry, we run out of money, we can't give you another contract." So there's the question there. The question is, how many people are actually affected by this? Because I understand that the Stroke Association offer effectively a home-based service for people. That's what I understand it to be. I may be wrong, but that's what I understand it to be. And if that is correct, do we know how many people are affected? And lastly, there are sort of a lot of, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but a lot of reassuring words about everything will be okay. But I'm not convinced in what's being said that these people will actually be getting the service they need, or the same level of service they need. And I think I'd like a bit more assurance about that. So those are my questions on that. I hope that's clear. I'll happily go back and reiterate them if you want me to.
Thank you.
So, thank you. The contract has been rolling over for a number of years. We reached the point in terms of procurement where we couldn't roll it over any further from a contractual perspective. In terms of the way it's been funded, there was what I can only describe as an accounting error some years ago, so that the service itself, and I may get the numbers wrong, so my apologies if I do, but the service itself is in the region of about 77,000 a year, and the actual pot that's set aside specifically against this service is in the region of about 16,500, 17,000 a year. So there's always been a gap. And so it has always been funded through underspends. This didn't come to light because of where the way the budget was allocated, is my understanding, as in the service line that goes back into the ledger and some financy stuff that I'm not technically qualified to advise on. And so that's what's brought about the shortfall. In terms of the notice for the contract, and I take your point about the voluntary sector and the fragility of the voluntary sector, what we agree that we'll do, if we're going to change a contract that has an impact on the voluntary sector, there's a minimum of 3 months notice, which would have taken us to June of this year. It's part of the reason that it was extended when we did find we had some short-term cash to the end of December. I'll have to come back to you on the number of people, because it will vary, because it's a referral contract, so it's a referral service, and the referrals break down mainly from NHS colleagues, some self-referrals, and a small amount from the local authority. It is a one-to-one service, so by that I don't necessarily mean that there'll be a single person going in and providing a service over a number of weeks. There could be a single person going in and working with somebody and saying, well, you need this advice, that help, here's a website, there's some stuff, whatever that might be. So it is a personalised service, you're absolutely right. And I'll cycle back to your question in a moment, Judith. I've just worked through Graham's. And the comforting words, I take the point, absolutely take the point. And I think fully understanding that people are very concerned whenever they see this kind of change. And so I understand the anxiety around that. What we are saying is that we can't completely mitigate, we can't replicate this service. But there are other services that are available for people who experience a stroke in Portsmouth. So if I can answer Kath's first question, if you are suffering a stroke or experiencing a stroke or in the middle of it, need that treatment, then QA is the place. They have that's where you go for that intervention, that clinical medical intervention. There is then a post-stroke rehab service that it operates within Portsmouth community. So there is a stroke rehab service. This was very much a contract that was set up through the local authority contribution to the Better Care Fund. The vast majority of referrals into this service receive information and advice. We believe not all of that information and advice, but a lot of that information and advice is available through the Stroke Association's website. Now, I take the point that won't work with our residents that are digitally excluded, but there is a lot of that information and advice on the website. We have other community groups in Portsmouth that work with people who have experienced a stroke and not affiliated to the Stroke Association. So in terms of your question, Councillor Smythe, about voluntary sector, it might have been yours, Councillor Healy, apologies, there are organisations within our local voluntary sector that do support people who have experienced a stroke. But I think the thing about the promising words, there are a lot of services related to people who've had a stroke. There are also more generic services that can work with people who have the effects of stroke, but not necessarily stroke focused. So in terms of physical impairment, in terms of reablement, a lot of our services are geared to do that. A lot of the services we share with our Solent colleagues are geared to do that. But it would be wrong of me to say that we'll absolutely replace this service, because we won't. We don't have the resource to do that. And the personal contact of someone who's very specifically trained in working with people that have experienced a stroke. Obviously, we've got the stroke rehab service, but in this particular case, that's what will change. Have I answered both of your questions? Have I missed anything?
Councillor Graham Heaney?
Yeah, broadly, I think you've answered it. I mean, I think the problem we're going to have is that the existence of the service and knowledge about it is obviously pretty good, I think. And the danger we're going to have is that when it all gets spread around, people are going to say, where the hell do I go? Who do I contact? And obviously the Stroke Association could have a role in trying to help signpost people. But obviously we just take their contract away from them. So that may put them under a bit of pressure. So that's my concern, is that people will not be able to find the things they need.
And that's a key point about information. Sorry, I did not. Oh, sorry, go on, Chen.
No, I was going to say, Andy, did you want to say anything back?
Sorry, my apologies. So I think information and advice is a key part of that. The work that we're talking about doing, between now and the end of the calendar year, a lot of people come to stroke support services through primary care, through their practice. I won't say their GP, because there's more than a GP in a practice. And so that information, communication, where do you go? That's a big chunk of where we focus communication. The other part is the voluntary sector, is through things like the Hive directory and the Hive help desk. We've had conversations with the Hive about this. And there's somewhere in between those two places, really, which is, where do people go for information? Where do they trust? Having a conversation recently with our colleagues in HUK Portsmouth, the Bradbury Centre in North End High Street, people go there for stuff. So if you've got put some information there, put communication there, that sort of thing. So trying to figure out where is the best place to land that communication that isn't necessarily as focused as maybe the Hive or as primary care.
Thank you. Councillor Stuart Brown, can I just check? You've had patiently waited with your hand up. Is it about this issue, or can we finish this issue first and then come to you?
by all means, finish the issue. It's on a different topic.
Great, thank you. Councillor Judith Smythe.
What I wanted to say, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. What I wanted to say about this is that the way we've handled the communications on this has been apparently appalling. I mean, it sounds a lot of money and it's been a good service, I have no doubt, but £16,000 in the full range of all the services available to people who've had strokes is a very small amount of money. Can we have some much better communication in the future about this sort of thing? Because from what I gathered from a conversation I had very recently with somebody in my surgery on Saturday, in fact, is that the whole chunks of the service were moving out of Portsmouth. And effectively, we won't be having any services at all.
I think one of the issues is you can't control how the press report things. But Andy, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah. I think it's really tough, isn't it? I think no matter where you communicate and how you communicate, the worry that people have, and I suppose it goes back to an earlier point about the worry about ambulance services, about acute hospital services, and that the real concern there is in our society at the moment, along with all of the other pressures that are on our residents. So I think the thing about all of those great chunks of services leaving Portsmouth isn't true, but I can see why people would worry about that when they hear one thing, but it feels really threatening to them.
Yes,
it creates a huge amount of anxiety.
Judith, could you silence? Yeah, thank you.
And so I think we tried to communicate as best we could, and we'll continue trying to do that over December. And the first people we communicated with were the Stroke Association themselves, and we've had discussions and met with them along with our NHS colleagues. So there probably is more that we can do, because I'd never say never. But I think it's really difficult, and I think there will be a natural anxiety that will then feed and maybe interpret things that aren't happening, that aren't there. But I take your point. Communication can always be better.
Thank you, Andy. Okay, Councillor Stewart-Brown.
Thanks, Chair. Andy, thanks for such a detailed report. I was hoping just to ask what I hope are a couple of fairly quick and simple questions about the support for unpaid and unofficial carers. So the first one was just, can we have a bit more detail about what mechanisms the council's got in place to support people who are providing care unofficially in an unpaid capacity? And secondly, certainly from personal experience, a lot of people who do look after a friend or family member or relative don't necessarily consider themselves to be carers. Are we doing anything to engage with those people so that they know that those support mechanisms do apply to them and that they can access those services if they need them?
Yeah, so in terms of support for carers, in the Care Act of 2014, carers, unpaid carers were given equal billing, if you like, to people that have support needs. And so there's an obligation as such, duty on the local authority to conduct an assessment of needs with carers. Some local authorities contract that out, so they get organisations to come in and do that for them. We don't. We have a carers centre in Portsmouth that work with unpaid carers. So the support that's available is basically all on is based upon an assessment of need. So what's going on for you as a carer? You know, what are your caring duties? Are there any other mechanisms you can use to get respite from that? And then how can we help? How can we support? For some people, it will be just making sure that they've got as full a social life as they can have, so that they can have a respite from caring. And for some people who care, the person they're caring for can understand that, and we can give them information and advice, and that can improve their lives. For a lot of our carers in society, of course, they're caring for someone who's living with dementia or some other mental health challenge, and it's more difficult to give people the respite, to give people a break in that respect. So it can be anything from asking someone from one of our care agencies to come in and work with the individual while the carer takes a break. It can be loading up some money on a prepaid card so that a carer can go out somewhere and have a day out, have a day away whilst we provide replacement care. It can be overnight respite, and we've recently changed our offer for overnight respite, particularly for people who care for someone living with dementia, to use Harry Sutton House, the ground floor of Harry Sutton House. So we have a couple of beds available that are bookable, that people can have respite in whilst their carer takes a break. But there shouldn't really be a limit. If we've got something that will meet a carer's needs and it's broadly within our eligibility criteria, our statutory eligibility criteria, then we'll meet it. We do have people who are carers who have a direct payment. So they have a chunk of money, we work up a support plan with them, but we give them the money over and they administer that themselves, and they sort of sort their own care package, if you like. And as it stands at the moment, we also don't charge for carers services. We are enabled to legislatively, but we've taken the decision not to do that. Personally, I think that's the right decision. You've probably got enough to get on with if you're caring, but not all local authorities see it that way. In terms of communication and identification, you are absolutely right. So we try and frame the language differently. Do you help someone? You know, do you know someone who needs help, whatever that might be? And we've identified, and again, I haven't got the numbers off the top of my head, but we've identified sort of between 2,000 and 3,000 people in the city who we know of. And we advertise, we put information in places that people go. We have a website for our carers service. We do proactive identification if we get referrals in. But there's always a lot of people that we miss because there's a huge amount of people caring across the country, millions of people. So we communicate where we can, we communicate where we think it's sensible. There are discussions at the moment as to whether there should be a duty for the public services to refer into the local authority when they identify a carer. Again, given the amount of people that the service sees, primary care is often a key place for people who, although they may not identify themselves, the person working with them in primary care may identify them as a carer, and we do get referrers from that source. But we'd like to see, for instance, DWP referring people in that they know that carers benefit is something that people are entitled to, and so it'd be quite easy to do that. And we'd like to see a lot more referrals in, if only so that we can just give people information. So we do what we can in terms of communicating and helping people understand they're a carer and they've got rights and entitlements. But there's still some work to do, I think. Yeah, that's helpful.
Thank you, Andy. Is that okay, Councillor Brian?
Yes, Andy, thanks very much indeed.
I've got a very quick one, and thanks for. I thought it was a really comprehensive report, actually. There's some really good positives, and thanks for staff who've clearly are working really, really hard. It's probably a yes, hopefully, but it says about Russets was one of the only area that needed, I think, improvement, and that was December 2022. So presumably there's an action plan that's being closely monitored with that.
Yeah, that's right. We've the Care Quality Commission does what they call intelligence-focused inspections. So once upon a time, you'd know that you get an inspection every so many months, years, whatever it might be. That's changed slightly. So we are working towards our next inspection with an action plan to move to good.
Right. And if I can, one more, I'm going to sneak in another question. On 7.5 Mental Health Act assessments, at the bottom of page 48, it goes on to page 49. It mentions that there was an example about a person waiting over a week for the execution of a section 135, etc. Has that been sorted? Is that sorted out now?
Yeah, we tend to get these delays, and so people will move on and will get a service. And what we've been doing in recent times is communicating with our colleagues in Hampshire and Southampton, who also have an approved mental health practitioner service, and looking at who is the priority, who is in most need for bed, transport, whatever it might be. So yes, people do get a service. It's just we're worried that we're seeing more incidences of people waiting, and it's a really distressing time in someone's life. Affects the people around them, and it's just a worry. So yes, people do move through. As I say, we tend to report on this quite regularly to our corporate governance group as well, and of course are working very closely with our NHS partners to resolve where we can those issues.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stuart Bryan? It's an old hand or a new hand? Old hand, okay. Anyone else?
Actually, some trying to be a good site.
Okay, thanks very much. So, thank you very much, Andy. I'm going to move next. You don't have to. I know you've got another meeting, so I presume you're going. So thank you very much. So the next item on the agenda is item 6, which is Solent NHS Trusts, and that's Alistair Snell. Alistair, could you give us a brief summary of your report, and then members will ask questions.
Thank you. Chair. I will be brief and assume the paper is read. I just thought it'd be useful on the first 2 items to briefly explain why we're moving estate, as I think it wasn't quite clear there. So for our moving of our physiotherapy and specialist physiotherapist services out of QA into Jubilee House is to enable some estate works at PHU to really improve the urgent emergency care flow of patients and to really help their offer. So we are currently working on refurbing our own Jubilee House site to enable that tailor-made for those services, and I think it'll be a real positive offer for our staff and our patients as a result. On item 2, for podiatry, the reason we are moving out of Cosham Health Centre is because the building is to be used as part of a longer-term strategy between the ICB and property services. We are currently moving to Thomas Parr House, and I was going to quickly talk about the mental health hub, but notice also in Joe York's paper later on, just want to highlight what a positive initiative I think this really is, really showcasing and highlighting that partnership work of the Health and Care Portsmouth, linking to our conversation earlier about partnership work and system working, and this is, I think, going to prove to be a very positive offer for the residents of Portsmouth. Item 4 is briefly discussing how we're trying to rationalise our parking to make sure that those staff that need parking are able to have it and to help boost our green plan. And finally, Fusion, I think we've touched on that, so I won't cover any more ground unless there's any further questions on that.
Thank you very much. Any questions, councillors? I've got one if I can very quickly. You might have just actually touched on that, but on item 2, 2.8, it said that there's a move is at the request of Hampshire and Isle of Wight ICB and then NHS Property Services. Why is the move happening? Is it saving money? Is it extending the service?
Joe might want to come in. I understand that the building is no longer fit for purposes and there's a longer and wider strategic view of how they can reuse that. I understand there has been some MP interest, but if Joe wants to come in, maybe she can shed some more detail on the intent.
I've got actually Claire first, actually, if it's on the same item, if that's okay. No? Okay. Actually, it's the wrong hand. Sorry, my mistake. Joe.
Oh, sorry, Chair. Yeah, so if we're referring to the podiatry services that were currently or were previously provided out of the Cosham Health Centre, this was, I think, linked to the Cosham Health Centre closure, so the closure of the practice there, which is detailed in my report. But it did mean that I think the podiatry service was probably the only service left in the Cosham Health Centre site. So very few services were then running out of that site. And we have had considerable concerns with buildings for a long time, as I'm sure members and colleagues who've been on the committee for a long time will be aware. So we have been keen to, if we could exit the whole of the building, then we pass that back to property services as a clear empty building that does provide a saving to the whole system. We are also and had previously, so prior to the Cosham Health Centre practice closing, GP practice closing, we had been working with them on a new provision, because I think, you know, the Cosham Health Centre was stopped being fit for purpose really many years ago, and we've struggled to find suitable alternatives. so we had submitted a business case to NHS England. It had been approved by what was then Portsmouth CCG back in December 2021 to redevelop and have capital funding for the Highclere site, which is just sort of at the top end of Cosham High Street. So that had all gone for planning permission. It's all been approved through the local authority, but was sat with NHS England for capital funding requests, and that was part of a national pause in NHS capital funding. With the Cosham Health Centre closing, that has the MP for Portsmouth North has been very vocal with Secretary of State, and we have been trying to unlock that, and Solent and the team have been working very closely with NHS England Estates Department to look at how best we can provide that building. I think everyone's really keen that that goes ahead. The ICB has approved that site and the additional revenue funding required, but we're just still going back through with the Secretary of State, and I expect Alistair can give a bit more information. So it's quite a complicated scenario up there in Cosham, but as part of that, we all felt that the best thing to do would be to vacate completely the Cosham Health Centre site. We would envisage that podiatry and some other services would go back into Highclere as and when that's finished, and work in partnership with the practice there as well.
Thank you, Jo. I'm going to welcome Councillor Anne Briggs. Do you want to introduce yourself, and if you've got a question, you're next.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Anne Briggs, County Councillor for Waterloo and North States. Apologies, I've been listening all afternoon, but my hybrid didn't want to work, so I haven't been able to ask any questions. But I think on your last one, some very good questions were asked. And it is mainly on Portsmouth, and obviously, but we are around your perimeters. 3.2, not sure where to get support for your mental health. Great, but what happens to them Saturday and Sundays? Where do they go, please? And my other question would be, because we deal mainly with Southern Health, what benefits do you think Portsmouth residents are going to get by merging? Because and I would say this to Southern Health, I don't read the complaints about Solent that I do about Southern. So I've been listening very carefully to Councillor Smythe, and I absolutely concur with her reservations. So I know you probably can't answer that last question, but...
So regarding the second question, it's very, very important to all stakeholders in there that we ensure there's a very strong clinical and quality governance structure throughout the trust, and we're reviewing that as an entire work stream as part of Fusion to ensure that's there from day one, there's governance. So that's absolutely a priority, and to make sure that we have those escalation lines there, and how to record any instance that happen, and if there's any need for help to be there. I can't comment any further on
it wasn't a fair question, but I mean, your business plan still hasn't gone in. Which
when wasn't that a priority, Alistair? It's been a priority for 5 years.
Sorry, can I just ask for clarification when what wasn't a priority?
The whole clinical governance and quality. You know,
so for Solent, it's always been a priority, and I can only speak on behalf of Solent.
Well, I can speak on behalf of Southern Health. We tried very, very, very hard to work on this, and the fact that it was so big made some more difficulties to that. I won't go into any further detail, but it's I don't know a health trust that doesn't have it as a priority. It's just that success in achieving it is more elusive.
And there's also the first question from Councillor Anne Briggs actually was about the mental health hub, and it was a good point about weekend provision. Are you able to respond to that?
So with the specifics, I don't know the close detail of all the pathways open to all of our patients during the weekends, so I won't hazard a guess, but I'm more than happy to write back after the meeting with all the key offers in the city for our patients.
I think that would be helpful, because I know you give a timing to when you get the most phone calls in, but I should think sometimes weekends could be a very difficult time for a person if they're alone and with they obviously need communication. So yes, please, I'm sure the Portsmouth councillors would appreciate the update.
Yeah, more than happy to send that after the meeting.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Graham Heaney next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's about the Padashi service, actually. The permanent relocation is going to be Thomas Parr House, as it says in the report, and it talks about transport, and it makes reference to public transport and buses, but my concern is that it's stuck out on a limb in Cosham. I used to represent Cosham, so I know the area very well, and in fact the 22 only runs an hourly service, so if you are reliant on public transport to get to Thomas Parr House, it is going to be very difficult, and if you need more than one bus to get there, your journey is going to take maybe half a day, possibly, depending on how far away you are. So I have to say, I think there are some concerns about accessibility and about using that site for people who don't have access to their own transport or someone who can actually drive them there. And I wonder, if we need to reconsider that.
So absolutely. So Roger Battery from Healthwatch has challenged us on exactly that, and we absolutely considered all possible estates that we had open to us, and at the moment the Thomas Parr House was the only one available as close to the original site as possible. We note that the public transport isn't as frequent as the previous one, but it's something we have considered, and we flagged up, and we are publicising, and we have engaged with patients. But at the moment we don't see any other estate available. There is parking on site for those people who are able to park, but there is limited estate and limited options near that site. So unless we move significantly further away, which would be potentially longer journeys, there aren't many other options at all.
Thank you, Alistair. Could I just take Joe York before I go back to you, Graham?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sorry, and I just wanted to be clear, because obviously we are continuing the provision at St Mary's as well. This is around provision in the north of the city, and we have also been looking with some of the practices that are based in Cosham as to whether we could use any premises in the surgeries as well, and I believe those conversations are ongoing, but again we are quite restricted in the estate that we've got up in the north of the city. That's why we're also keen on the new build up at Highclere, which we think will resolve some of these issues for us.
Thank you, Joe. Councillor Graham Heaney.
Oh, well, that's helpful. Actually, I was going to ask whether GP surgeries could actually accommodate some sessions or whatever. And in fact, the St Mary's campus is probably even easier to get to, whether you live in the north or the south. So the fact that you are still able to access that, will people have a choice about being able to go to one or the other?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Patient choice, always. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for that intervention, Joe.
Thank you.
Graham, did you have another question?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Has anyone else got any more questions? I've got one, if I could, very briefly. On 3.7, in relation to the mental health hub, we've got some early data in about the soft launch. How did that compare to what might have been anticipated? Is it better, worse, or don't we know?
I don't remember seeing a trajectory. I know that the data has doubled at the first month. I'd expect it to increase almost exponentially over the next 6 months as it becomes more well known and publicised and signposted. But compared to how we were expecting it to go, I'm unable to answer that, I'm afraid.
Great, thank you. Any more questions, councillors? No. Thank you very much, Alistair. You're welcome to stay, but if you need to go, I understand.
Thank you very much. Been a pleasure. Bye.
Thank you. Okay, so next item on the agenda is item 7, Health and Care Portsmouth and Hampshire and Isle of Wight ICB. It's the longest agenda item title. And we've got Joe York for that. Joe, can you give us a brief... It's not your fault, is it?
Yeah, thank you. And again, I'll try and be as brief as possible and assume that people have read the report. And just wanted to pick up just in terms of coverage of the report, and my role is Health and Care Portsmouth, place director within the ICB. So I cover predominantly the Portsmouth City area. And this is a report that I used to bring sort of previously and from the Portsmouth, when it was Portsmouth CCG. More than happy if it would be helpful and to work with colleagues to provide more information about the wider Hampshire and Isle of Wight ICB, where that may be relevant, and to look at, can we pick up some of the surrounding areas as well within this report, if that would be happy. But at the moment, we pick up a little bit about some of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight work, but it's predominantly in relation to Portsmouth City, but really happy to...
Before you go on, thanks for that. I was going to ask the other way around, actually. So on page 20, it's got across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, but actually, so the figures about the pharmacy and doctors and dentists, etc. And I wondered whether is it easy to give us the figures for our area? So the area that is HOSP covers. So I was looking more the other way, actually, if I'm honest.
So the reason we have put the pharmacy, dentistry and optometry on there, this is a relatively new delegated commissioning responsibility to ICBs. We were an early adopter in Hampshire and Isle of Wight of taking on responsibility for those three services, and we're aware of how much concern that there was. So that's why we've done it at the Hampshire and Isle of Wight level, but absolutely we could look at what that breaks down to across. Certainly Portsmouth, it might be slightly more tricky to get that for the sort of the southeast part of Hampshire, but if we focus perhaps on Havant, Waterlooville, Fareham and Gosport predominantly, then I think we probably could.
I think it would be useful, so yeah thank you. I interrupted you, sorry.
No, and I was aware Councillor Brown had his hand up as well, so I didn't know.
Okay.
But are you happy just to let me update on a very few?
Yeah, you do your update first. I interrupted yours.
No, that's fine. So it was just to explain the coverage. Just to say, we talk about the Portsmouth South East Hampshire urgent care system in the report, and reflecting what Tracy Redmond has said. Although in the report we reflected that we had been able sort of earlier in May to move from our escalation at Opal level 4 down to escalation level 3, that we've been in Opal 4 for quite some considerable amount of time post COVID in Portsmouth and South East Hampshire, and that's related to both the hospital Opal system and escalation around the system. That went back down to Opal level 3, which meant pressure had eased due to all the work we've been doing that Tracy has explained, and I'm sure no doubt Graham will do previously, but just wanted to say that we are back up to level 4 at the moment. But what we would hope to see is a much more regular movement and escalation and de-escalation, rather than being in that heightened period of escalation for such a long period as we have been post-COVID. So positive in that respect. Just wanted to pick up an update briefly around the John Pounds surgery in particular, just to say that we have now reached agreement around rates, a lease agreement between the district valuer who works for the ICB and the council, and we're now just waiting for final confirmation from the practice. So once the practice is confirmed, we can finally review the draft lease, and then hopefully both parties will be in a position to sign. And then we are doing some engagement work in the Portsea area and also in Paulsgrove to look at what health needs and how can we support those local communities where they are the most vulnerable and have some of the highest levels of health inequalities. And I think they were the main points that I really wanted to pick out, just to flag. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo. Stuart, Councillor Stuart Brown, you put your hand up first, I know. Or was it a legacy?
No, I think Councillor Heaney was first.
Okay, I don't mind. Graham, do you want to go first?
Go on then. Since you called me, go on then. So I've got a couple of questions here, if that's all right. The first one relating to the dentistry, and particularly the new dentistry contracts that have come in. I was wondering if you had any further detail on what sort of uptake on those new dentistry contracts there's been. And secondly, I've got a question about whether they're necessarily in the right places. So I have a resident who has managed to finally get an NHS dentist for both her and, for the first time in his life, her 5-year-old son. But she lives on Queen's Road in Fratton, and the nearest one that she was able to find is at Lakeside up in Cosham. Now, in the grand scale of things, it's not a huge distance to travel, but obviously not all families will have access to a car or funding for public transport. So do you think there's any information on, are the surgeries that have taken them up covering the right geographical spread for residents? My second set of questions is on a different topic, so I'll let you do those first.
Should we stick with thank you. That's really helpful. If we stick to the one topic, because I've got one on that topic, and it'd be useful to interject before going on to another one, if that's okay. But and Graham might as well. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, of course. So I think access to dentistry is a huge issue nationally, and we've known that's been a huge issue in Portsmouth alongside most of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, but particularly in the areas in Hampshire and Isle of Wight like Portsmouth, where we have high levels of deprivation. So Portsmouth, Southampton, Havant, Gosport, and the Isle of Wight, where the Isle of Wight is particularly more around workforce challenges as well. So we have some particular issues. These contracts, the new contracts that came about, were probably planned about 18 months ago, and they were on the result of the fact that we had lost services in Portsmouth, and where they had and it's one of the benefits actually of commissioning from an ICB rather than NHS England, and the reason the changes were made. Prior to these new mobilisations, those contracts went out across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. So they were, in effect, commissioned services for Portsmouth residents, but when they went out at that time, sort of 18 months, 2 years ago, they didn't get any any take up from providers willing to practice in Portsmouth. So we were then having services for Portsmouth residents in Andover, Alton, all sorts of places. Those contracts then came to an end March this year, and that procurement was done. So it was done in 4 particular areas: Portsmouth, Havant, Gosport, Southampton, and the Isle of Wight. But we weren't successful in mobilising or getting a preferred anyone taking up the tender in the Isle of Wight, which we're looking at. So really, and the way these contracts work is we don't have the same. Often when we commission NHS services and we go out to the market for those, we have a building, an NHS building that's different in dentistry. So the provider that takes up the contract, or wants to bid for the contract, has to provide or has to find a building. So it's quite difficult then to make sure you get that in the right place. What we were focusing on particularly at that time was the city. We weren't really narrowing it down about where in the city. It was to make sure that we had additional provision in the city. And again, I think as we move forward, we're going to have to look at this much more and look at how we sustain that provision of NHS dentistry. And we've talked about this before in some of these committees and in the Health and Wellbeing Board. There are some disincentives to the current national contract and the UDA rate, which is Unit of Dental Activity, which means if you're in a deprived area, perhaps it actually costs the dentist more to provide that service. But also, as contracts have changed over time, the UDA rate has changed. So some of the providers that are coming on, taking on new contracts, are perhaps getting a slightly higher UDA rate. Well, that might put more pressure on the dentist down the road. We've got huge workforce challenges, and entry requirements into NHS dentistry are different from private dentistry. So there is quite a complex. A lot of it's national that we need fixing, and again, our MPs across Hampshire and I've been really vocal and supportive in raising that. But there's a lot for us to do in around dentistry. So what we're trying to do to improve access is look at and we're just exploring this at the moment. Can we look at a dental bus? What would that look like? And how would we pilot that in our areas of most need and deprivation? So I know that we're not quite at the stage, I don't think, of thinking where in the city. It's about how do we get that get provision into the city. But again, of course, as we do this in future, we will be, as the ICB and Health and Care Portsmouth, better placed to have those conversations with potential providers to say where might we want to put that. That original contract was just the city. We can start to narrow it down based on need, I think, as we move forward.
Thank you. I'm going to ask.
Sorry, did you have any information on the uptake rates of the new contracts?
Not yet. They're still mobilising. What tends to happen, what we've seen previously, is when a new NHS dentist opens, they get sort of flooded, and then there's lack of availability. So we've been working quite hard with the new providers to avoid that and to try and look at what does that mean. We know we've got some real challenges in access right across the board that we need to look at over the next months and years, really.
Thank you. Councillors with their hands up, can I just ask, are your questions about dentistry or not? So what I'd like to do then is just take more questions on dentistry before going back to Councillor Stuart Brown. That's okay. So Councillor Graham Heaney.
Yeah, I think, the first question I was going to ask has been answered about the provision of the contracts. To know more about that would be quite useful when we have that information. But I would just wanted to ask, you talked about the big dental discussion event, and I'm just wondering whether, I put dental contract at the bottom as one of the big issues, as to whether in fact there is pressure being applied locally from practicing, the NHS and dentists to say, look, this does need to be dealt with, because otherwise, we're going to be stuck in this situation where where the contract works against us. My second question was, could we employ salaried dentists directly in their NHS system? Why can't we do that? Because it looks like the old model of private contractors, a bit like GPs, is no longer going to meet our needs. So we have to have a different method of procuring the service, and direct the salaried dentist would be one way forward. And can we do it?
Thank you. Jo.
Thank you. So I think in terms of the first question, I think there is lots of pressure around the national contract, and I even had to go to a health select committee in the Houses of Parliament to it was being chaired by Steve Bryan, who's one of the MPs in Hampshire, and because we were an early adopter to give evidence to the health select committee, because I think there's recognition, and all the National Health Watch body was there as well. So I think there's lots of pressure around that contract, and they really are looking at it. I'm not quite sure where the answer has got to. I know it's been with ministers. We had some information, and we're expecting more. I think we're expecting more detail on the reforms over the summer, but in some ways the Parliamentary Select Committee may delay some of that, because it may change how they do those reviews. But that's just my sort of personal conjecture, perhaps. But at the time, we were told we would expect more information, more detail on the reforms in over the summer. So lots happening. I think everyone's aware of that national contract approach. In terms of the, sorry, I'm lost. Sorry, what was the second question? Sorry.
I asked if
salary dentist. Yeah,
salary, because the current model, private contracts, doesn't seem to be working a bit like GPs. We're having to move to that model, a different model.
Yeah, so we are, and again, I think who would employ those salary GPs. I think one of the biggest challenges we've got at the moment, again, is around that entry requirements into the NHS, and it can take up to a year for new dentists to, and particularly international dentists, come from internationally, international recruitment to work in the NHS. They could go straight into a private practice. So I think that's one of the difficulties we have with dentistry, that there is that strong private provision. So you've always got that sort of dual market, if you like. What we are doing is working with the university, Portsmouth University, and it's called a Centre of Dental Development, and again that will look at how we can utilise more alternative roles, so dental therapists, etc. Could we, and they could employ dentists perhaps, and that may make it easier for international dentists coming across to train. And again, the other thing that we're expecting the NHS workforce plan about how can we recruit more people into all professions, and again, in the same way that we're working with the university and supporting them in their bid to be a medical school, we're also supporting their bid for them to become a dental school. At the moment they're a dental academy, but if they could be a full dental school, that would again help us to recruit more dentists into the area. So we're trying always.
Thank you. Are there any more on dentistry before we go on to other councillors?
Just to come briefly on that, I mean, it does seem peculiar to me that you can have we expect safe practice in dentistry. You can go to a private practice and go in there and they work to a certain standard, and then NHS insists on a different standard. It doesn't seem to make any sense. I mean, if it's safe for the private practice to work, and most of it's private, why can't they have the same standards? I mean, it's bonkers, quite frankly. Yeah. It's just another bureaucratic hurdle to stopping people getting the services they need.
Yes, and I would agree, and I think again, these are national sort of issues that are being looked at and are being addressed, and those very questions raised. How can we improve that and reduce that time so that we've got more of a level playing field? Hopefully we'll get some traction on that soon.
Okay, thank you. Any more, Graham, on dentistry? No. Any other councillors on dentistry? Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Stuart Brown. Your second question.
Thanks, yes. My second question was around the Island City practice, which obviously came about as a result of the merger between Lake Road and Sunnyside. Yeah. So I remember in the run-up to that merger happening, myself and my ward colleague, Councillor Dave Ashmore, actually went over and spoke with the management team at Lake Road, and we were given reassurances that the new merged practice would have more efficient systems and people will be able to get through more easily and share the resources between the two practices, and hopefully the third practice, when John Pounds does eventually come back in. I've had several residents mention that if they need to phone up, they've been told, right, you need to phone at 8 a.m. if it's an emergency. If it's not an emergency, phone back after 10. But then if you phone back at 10 o'clock, you get a voicemail saying that they're not taking so there's obviously something not quite working right, probably working the bugs out of the system with the merger. I was just wondering if you had any more detail on if there's any data available on how people have been able to access their GPs through what was the two surgeries and obviously now the one combined practice. Has there been any impact on people's ability to get through? Any information in that sort of area?
Yeah, so haven't necessarily got information to hand around Island City and the merger. What we do know, we are starting now to get much better information about access across the board in primary care. There are still some glitches with that information, and we're often not comparing apples with apples when we look at how two surgeries operate and the type of appointments that we offer. But we know that we are seeing an increasing number of appointments being offered and being delivered. So 13% increase across Portsmouth this April based on last year, and we could certainly provide perhaps in the next report more detailed on that across the practices. I think we recognise, both locally in Portsmouth and across Hampshire and Isle of Wight and nationally, the issues that we've got around access to primary care, and we've been doing a huge amount of work on that, and NHS England last month published the national paper, The Delivery Plan for Recovering Access to Primary Care. A lot of what we've been doing locally has been around that implementation of the digital technology with the callback service. I could again go back and check and provide an update maybe with the minutes as to whether Island City have got that digital technology, because what that means is that people can then call, rather than you hanging on the phone, you can receive a call back. So quite a lot of our practices now have got that. We've been doing a huge amount of communications work with the integrated comms team around access to primary care, the campaign around a team around takes a team to care for a community, and explaining those different roles, and did quite a lot of work with the Cosham and Paulsgrove population around North Harbour closure, which we've now gone out to other areas. So we're really recognise the challenges. All of our primary care colleagues are doing a significant amount of work to resolve those issues. And as we can see, the appointments being delivered is increasing quite significantly year on year. But I will go back and get some specific report information on those practices, if that's helpful.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Councillor Anne Briggs.
Thank you. Joe, could you just give me more information on No Limits? I know you've only just started it in the end of, I think you started it in early May, so you haven't got many details on it yet. But how long do you think a young person would have to wait? Who are they doing it face-to-face, or is it going to be online? And will care leavers and children in care get priority from it, please?
Again, so I'm possibly not able to answer all of those questions. I do believe it is face-to-face and online. This is, so it should support people who are already in the system, so who've had a referral from their GP and CAMS, but I could certainly find out, for younger children, but for older children, they can self-refer. But I can definitely find out more information about the waiting times for you and provide that. I haven't got that to hand, I'm afraid. But as you say, it's quite a new service.
Yeah, I was just hoping they were going to, it's a job for them to get into CAMS. I presume that most of them will be referred through school.
Yeah. So it is to sort of help while people are either waiting for a CAMS referral, or perhaps instead of a CAMS referral, and enable us to do that early intervention and prevention, so that we're responding before there's a need for CAMS. So that's why there is the self-referral element for those sort of older children.
Yeah, so who's providing it? Are they trained counsellors or?
Yes, I think it's a voluntary service. It's Hampshire Youth Access, but I can certainly provide you with some more detail on that one.
Thank you.
Apologies. I've been off for a couple of weeks, so I haven't got all of the detail that I would usually have had of providing that. I do apologise.
And you'd be pleased to know I'm not going to ask you about dentists, but I just have to make a comment that this has been going on for 3 or 4 years. I know you can't magic a dentist, but people are getting more illness with their mouths, more problems which they wouldn't have. And I'm not blaming you, Joe. It's a problem we just can't. Sir, it is so worrying, and I think all counsellors get people who are quite distressed, and we feel so useless because we can't do anything about it. And it's got to be really 5-6 years, I think, from when they were coming to the Hampshire HASC. So yeah, it is really doom and gloom around that. But that's it, Joe.
And I appreciate that, and I don't want to give false hope, but I do think working in partnership and having that more local focus around Dentistry Commission will mean we can do more quickly to resolve some of these issues. As we said, there's some national challenges, but how we work with local authorities and look at some of the oral health strategies and improvements, that's what I think we can do, and start to get out to schools more quickly and support children so they have earlier better oral health, so that we're not seeing some of those horror stories that we know are happening at the moment. So that's another area of the work we're trying to do locally.
Are you sending them to school like we did a long time ago, with giving them all a toothbrush and toothpaste? They don't all brush their teeth at home.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because and that's why partnership between health and local authority is so important, because actually the oral health strategy and that side of it is within the remit of the local authority now under public health. But again, we need to really look at how do we manage that, and how do we work across our organisations and manage the budgets to do some of that, because actually it probably is a really good preventative and more sustainable way of providing dentistry across the board.
It would probably be cheaper in the long run to give them all a toothbrush and toothpaste if parents aren't doing it at home.
Yeah, so absolutely, that's what, and certainly my team starting to work really closely with public health teams across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, because I lead on pharmacy, dentistry and optometry across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. And we're particularly working really closely with Helen, the public health team here, but we're broadening that with the other public health teams as well, to do just that and to think about how can we address those issues.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you, Jen. I've got a quick question. Well, it's probably a quick question. Well, the question might not be quick, and the answer probably would be quick. On the primary care access to GP practices, so there's some sort of encouraging news about the delivery plan, but the figures given relate to, I think, compared to April 2022, nothing sort of further back, and I just wondered whether that was anything to do with coming out of lockdowns and COVID, or anything like that.
No, it is really that we have really struggled to have that meaningful data on primary care around appointments and how we measure it. It was a bit like comparing apples and pears, really, and to do that across two practices, never mind across the city or across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. We now have a new tool, a piece of software, and that was a national issue as well, actually, around not being able to have those measures and that information. We now have new tools that we can do that with, and that's why we've only got it from 2022 into 2023. So it's a work in progress very much, but really useful that we've got it now.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, councillors? I've got one, actually, if I can. It's to do with pharmacies, and the funding for community pharmacy has dropped with reduction in the community pharmacy global sum on page 24. So that's obviously a major concern. Is that funding from the government that's dropped?
Sorry, I'd put myself on mute. Yes, it is. Yeah, so it's the funding that goes into community pharmacies.
So is that just annual cut that they've made, or is there a specific thing to do with our area?
It's changes in relation to the contract, I think, but again, I could probably find out a little bit more about that, but my understanding is it's in relation to the contract, and some of that is also in relation to changes in how people access dispensing and being able to do more online, accessing more online dispensing as well.
I mean, it's deeply disappointing that with rising costs, so there's actual a cut before even real term cut, but
I think my understanding is this was predominantly around, at the time, it was looking at sort of a 10-year plan around community pharmacy in the national contract, and so was part of a deal that was done back in, say, 2015, when we weren't anticipating such high levels of inflation as we've seen over the last year or so, and so that cut has been made worse by that. But that's my understanding. It's linked to the national contract and the paid and the deal that was done back when that contract was set initially.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Graham Heaney.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was about pharmacies, actually, and just reading your short paragraphs, it seems to me that there are some real contradictions in the way probably government is approaching pharmacies. There's a lot of talk about them being, community facilities, and they're going to be places where you can access advice and healthcare without having to go to GPs. Yet on the other hand, they are businesses, and their business models are being undermined. Partly because of the increase in, as you say, in this online prescription service, which I've been inundated with publicity trying to persuade me to go to some, service being delivered from somewhere else. But I, on principle, won't do it because I want to support my local pharmacy. I have a link with my GP who goes to my door, so I have no intention of doing that. But the trouble is, it's so convenient to do that, and actually that is undermining the pharmacy. So there's got to be some way in which we can say, look, this has got to change. We can't have this market free-for-all on prescriptions because it will completely undermine the basis of pharmacies if we want them to be some sort of community health service, because they just won't be able to sustain it. They're not going to make money out of offering advice on diet or other things. Yeah, so we really got to make some decisions, and we ought to be maybe banging on locally about what this is so that we can make sure somebody higher up notices.
Yeah, so you're right. It is a real contradiction, and I don't think we're going to reverse as a society the move towards online shopping or online dispensing in this case. So it's something we're going to have to think very differently about. We're looking at how we develop a community pharmacy strategy. The new contract does offer for community pharmacies, offers more funding around those support offers, that advice, undertaking health checks, etc. But you're right, that's always been seen as an added extra. If the core funding of the model isn't there, then that does create a real issue. And we know that we will soon see more pharmacists as they qualify from, I think it's 25, 26, being prescribers. So they are better placed as individual professionals to prescribe and to support primary care in that broader sense. The other challenge is that within PCNs, the PCN development, we're also seeing pharmacists working across different roles. So not necessarily. So again, a bit like the issues we've got in dentistry and primary care, not necessarily wanting to go and work in a community pharmacy dispensing, wanting more of a portfolio career. So we've got to work with our local pharmacists and our local primary care teams to really think about how do we do this best and how do we get that right model and improve that model, because it does feel like this has come along and caught us all a little bit by surprise, and I mean that broadly, nationally as well, and across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. Again, because we were in a deprived city and where the cost of living is affecting us, we're seeing that more, and we're seeing closures. So we're seeing the closures of Lloyd, not closures of Lloyd's, but Lloyd's Pharmacy selling their pharmacists. We're seeing some closures in Portsmouth, and I think next week we're at the Health and Wellbeing Board, and we had conversation at the previous one around this very issue and the pharmacy needs assessment, and being very clear as a Health and Wellbeing Board that we do not want to see any further reduction or closures of pharmacists in our area. So it again is a real challenge, but one we need to work together with all of our partners on to look at how we can move that forward. Particularly in the city where, as I say, we're starting to see those changes now. I think we've been anticipating them maybe in the future. It's happening now, so we need to address it now.
Thank you. I actually also wrote down about, just out of interest, because you mentioned about the prescription service in Leeds online, but are there any locally based online pharmacy services that you know of? Because like Councillor Heaney, I get adverts all the time from different ones, and I just wondered, although I prefer to support my pharmacy because I use it so often, I just wondered whether there are any locally based online pharmaceutical dispensers.
Not that I'm aware of as such. As I say, I think it's quite a sort of a national. It's got a warehouse in Leeds. It's quite a big chain. Big concern.
I didn't mean that one necessarily. I meant whether there are any companies that are based here who do online pharmacy service. But don't worry.
Oh, right. No, not that I'm aware of, but I could try and find out.
Thank you. Are there any more questions for Joe? I attended some of the Live Well events in my ward, St Thomas ward, which is covers half of Summerstown. They've been really, really good.
Excellent, thank you. I'll feed that back to the team. It's nice to get positive feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Joe. You're welcome to stay if you like, but if not, thank you. Okay, so the last item agenda is item 8, public health update, and it's from Claire Curry. Do you want to introduce yourself, Claire? I'm sorry earlier, I thought you had your hand up. It was the person below you in the box.
No problem at all, Councillor Jeffrey, and thank you very much. So I'm Claire Curry, Assistant Director of Public Health, Portsmouth City Council. So obviously I'm here today on behalf of Helen Atkinson, who many of you will know as the Director of Public Health in Portsmouth. And yeah, just to clarify again, I suppose I'm assuming that you've read the slides, and I'll pick up on a couple of points. Clearly my role is Portsmouth based. Lots of the work that we do in public health here in Portsmouth is absolutely with our colleagues across Health and Care Portsmouth, with colleagues in Andy's team, Joe's team, many of that you'll have spoken to already today, but also then across Hampshire Isle of Wight, so our colleagues in public health and across the system on Hampshire Isle of Wight. So, but my remit is broadly Portsmouth. So in terms of a few things just to go through, but just to pick up on what you were discussing with Joe there on oral health, and apologies I didn't get my hand up quite quick enough to come in, but clearly a really important issue in terms of oral health, particularly in terms of that preventative approach right from starting. Dental health is clearly important for, not only eating, but also talking and socialising, that confidence that young people need to have. So there is some work going on, as Joe alluded to, which Helen is very involved in, but working with the Dental Academy and with Solent NHS Trust on oral health promotion. So there is some work which is starting where funding is both from the Dental Academy and from Public Health to put in place a programme of oral health promotion with 3 focuses. So 1 on care homes, 2 on primary school and early years settings, and also on our homeless settings as well. So so hopefully that helps just cover that bit off. There is some active work going on in that space. But just returning to the slides, and hopefully you have, as I said, I won't go through the slides, but I will just pick up on a couple of points as we go through them by way of updates. So firstly, if we just going into the substance misuse slides, you'll see that there's been an increase in the numbers in drug and alcohol treatment, and I just really wanted to highlight that because I think it's a really encouraging sign really that those numbers are increasing. I think it's rising on for a couple of reasons really. One, because there's been increased investment in those services from national funding in the last year or so, and Alan, who is our Substance Misuse Commissioner, who has drafted those couple of slides on that topic, has outlined the initiatives that funding is going towards. So I think that's really positive. We've also had the recommissioning of that contract started with the new provider, so that the recommissioning completed with the new contract starting last summer, so summer 22, and I think that's obviously helpful as well in terms of providing staff security in terms of that longer term job security, obviously then being really good for motivation of those staff, and also the developments that have come along in the service with that. So there's a new website which is really good actually. It has online videos, can do online self-referrals, there's a chat function, and there's also increased accessibility to the service in terms of being able to walk in and actually be assessed on the same day, 7 days a week, but also through the website too. So I think really good signs on that. With sexual health, you'll also see in the slides that there's been following a systems thinking intervention that's now in the roll-in phase, and sexual health contract is an area where we work really integrated across Hampshire Isle of Wight, but also with Joe's team, so with the NHS elements of the sexual health provision. So this systems thinking roll-in has been an intervention which has been done across Hampshire Isle of Wight, across the sexual health services, across the whole patch. And actually this new clinical contact at that front door has been really good. It's been tried in areas of Hampshire first and in Southampton, and now it's coming to Portsmouth. And actually what that means is there's been a hugely reduced time where people need to contact the service to get to the right place, and they get to the right place straight away, whether that's just for advice or whether it's for having an appointment made to see the right person. So I think really good developments on that as well. An area of work which we have, because obviously Helen would have come to your scrutiny meeting last time about 6 months ago, and I think an area of work which we have been working on quite a bit since then is in developing the integrated care partnership strand of work. So across Hampshire Isle of Wight, obviously there's the ICB strategy. They've got lots of priorities. The Directors of Public Health across Hampshire Isle of Wight have taken away a couple of those priorities to actually lead on the development of those strands. So Helen is the lead for the social connectedness priority. So we've been working up that, and I think that's really important in terms of a preventative approach for being a protective factor for mental health and wellbeing, as well as for physical health. So that will be exciting to see as more of that comes through. The other strands in that which public health are involved in are the mental wellbeing strand and also the cardiovascular disease prevention strand, and that's obviously an area of work which we work on closely with ICB colleagues in Portsmouth, because a lot of the cardiovascular disease prevention is all around the same risk factors that we talk about: stop smoking, weight management, but also around early detection and good management of those conditions too. So lots of that collective work really taking shape as the ICB strategy develops. So just finally, some of the work which I'm particularly involved in is around the mental health and suicide prevention work. So I just thought an opportunity to highlight some of that. So I lead the what we call our real-time surveillance group across Hampshire Isle of Wight, and this is essentially looking at our suspected suicide data to enable us to take a really preventative approach on this area of work. So really important area of work, because it is obviously a leading cause of death, particularly in younger age groups, but also because it has quite a significant impact on people who are affected either very directly or indeed wider communities as well. And that's what I particularly wanted to highlight in terms of that support that is now in place for people who have been affected by suicide. So there's Amparo, which is our suicide bereavement support service, started just over a year ago. It's a Hampshire Isle of Wight service. We lead the commissioning of it in Portsmouth, and it's actively supporting people who have experienced bereavement through suicide. So it's and as part of this whole strand of work, we are developing those preventative strategies and that support. So I think a step forward on that. So I'll leave that there, but I'm really happy to answer any questions.
You were on mute, Chair.
Councillor Stuart Brown.
Thank you. Claire, I've got a few questions, please, about sexual health services. So I saw a recent news article that said that across the UK, there's been a massive increase in cases of syphilis, the highest since 1948, gonorrhea, the highest since 1918. Obviously, we don't necessarily know whether that's because there are more cases, or is it that more people are getting tested and we're finding cases that existed anyway and we didn't necessarily know about. And obviously there's also quite a strong movement now to have opt-out HIV testing for all medical appointments. I'm just wondering, can you give us some information around, has there been an increase in testing, or is it a genuine increase in cases, and the sorts of things that we could be doing locally to make sure that, because obviously the majority of symptoms for most STIs are no symptoms. A lot of people won't necessarily know they have an STI unless they get tested, and a lot of people won't think to get tested unless they have a symptom, so they obviously go undetected. And the sorts of things we can be doing to combat these sorts of infections.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. A really important question, and absolutely, we do in Portsmouth have high rates of both gonorrhea and syphilis, as you have observed in the national media too. That's, I suppose, not hugely surprising. We do have quite high rates generally on a range of things, so it sort of reflects our sort of local picture. So I think there's probably a few things there in terms of I know we're living with COVID now. COVID may seem, fairly long ago, but actually it wasn't that long ago, and we are still seeing, I think, the impacts of that. So there absolutely, as you referred to, there has been increased testing, as people have, started to socialise more, and actually think about some of these things again, then yes, the testing rates has gone up. So that's certainly part of it. It is also thought that there probably is, more transmission actually going on as well in our communities, not just Portsmouth, nationally. So, I think it is a feature of both of those, and that absolutely comes down to your point of, the need to get tested. So, if someone has had unprotected sex, that the message to go and get tested, really is important. It's not only obviously, sort of short term, a sexually transmitted infection that needs to be treated, but they also do have those longer term, health risks as well, which are really important that they are, picked up and treated. I think what's important for us here in Portsmouth is that we do think we're testing the right people. So while we have high rates, that is probably reflected because we are picking up the cases. So when we're testing, a good proportion of those are positive, and that's good because it means we're testing the right people. So some areas of the country, they won't have those high positivity rates, and they therefore may have lower rates, but that may not be so true. So we have to kind of understand what our data is telling us. But we do think we're testing the right people. But you're absolutely right, and it is a key part of that is absolutely about getting those messages out and continuing to get those messages out to people. In Portsmouth, again, we do have I think good access to tests. So both as I described through that sort of new telephone clinical triage point of contact in the sexual health service, that will help people get the right what they need to do sort of straight away, and that could be getting an online test, online sexual health test, or indeed it could be a face-to-face appointment, or whatever. But I think all of that helps the accessibility to testing.
And do you think there's also some work to be done around promoting the free HIV testing that's available for higher at-risk groups, like men who sleep with men and people from Black and African backgrounds, that they can order free testing kits online?
Absolutely, yeah. And sorry, I didn't pick up on that point, but yes, you're absolutely right in terms of HIV diagnosis. Again, really important. It is an area of active work in Portsmouth. Diagnosing HIV early rather than leaving it late is really important. We have been exploring work with the ED department at PHT around making sure that those HIV tests are we have pathways in place for that, and that is an area of sort of current work. We also have some really good work going on with the Navy, because clearly the Navy are a population who travel around the world to high risk places, and obviously when people return to Portsmouth, it's also something that we need to be thinking about too. So both in terms of HIV and in terms of other sexually transmitted infections. But absolutely agree with your points there, Councillor Brown.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Just quickly, before we go to Councillor Gia Smythe, could there be some more long-term trend figures? Because again, it's quite sort of comparing things quite often to the previous year, which is great. And I appreciate it can be difficult, but I think it'd be really useful to get more of those trends.
That's
awesome.
Absolutely. I'm very happy to take that away. And I should say that I'm sure your point, Councillor Smythe, is probably related, but just to say that in public health, we're really lucky. Actually, there's lots of published data on if you are interested in the meantime, on the OHID, the Office of Health and Office. And oh gosh, it's eluded me now. OHID, the great acronym, Office of Health and Improvement Disparities fingertips website. It's a great resource of all of the routinely published data on public health outcomes, and I'll make sure some of that's included for the next report.
Thank you. Councillor Judith Smythe.
You've kind of anticipated my question, Claire, and I'm glad. And also, Mark, I do think trends are always important. And if you've got a figure in a report, then just when you come to do the report for the next time, amend the report to add the next figure. So you don't have to do too much work every time. I think you're doing some great work. I'm a huge fan of public health teams, and I think we do a very good job here. But I mean, you've got some tables about referrals to wellbeing services. We all know you can go to a crap wellbeing service and it makes no impact at all. I'm sure you don't, but you can. You've got other figures all about activity. I mean, yes, great. But I would like to see at least the headline morbidity and mortality figures. The question we should be asking is, are we a healthier city than we were this time last year? And of course, there are figures for that. Even if it's just age-banded morbidity and mortality, that would be helpful. But we really do need to focus on outcomes, not activity. And there's some simple questions that could be asked. Do take up and testing of sexual and reproductive health indicators are greater? That's probably good. But is there a greater incidence and greater morbidity and mortality from that condition? For example, are children fatter across the city, or are they not so fat? I mean, that's what we need to know. Same for other aspects. Suicide prevention is a classic case. We've got the figures. We know how many people commit suicide in different age bands and different genders, and needs to be broken down a little bit. But is it increasing or decreasing? It doesn't say here. It says we're doing a lot more prevention. Good. But if we're doing a lot more prevention, it's still increasing. That means we get some other questions to answer. And I could go on. Claire, you know exactly what I'm talking about because I've probably talked to you about it before. But that's what we're interested in, actually. What we're doing working? And that gives us a chance to ask the questions that we can't ask now, which is, this sounds great, thank you very much. But we don't know if it's working or not. So please, can we have at least one side of a piece of paper with the information you have at your fingertips, and I know available nationally, on outcomes, health outcomes, please.
Thank you.
And I'm really happy to respond to that. Completely agree, Councillor Smythe. Completely happy to take that away. So thank you very much for raising that. So just on a couple of those points, I may not be able to pick up absolutely everything because I'll try and keep my comments brief. But in terms of those headline indicators that you are interested in terms of mortality, morbidity. So clearly, I suppose what we know nationally is that life expectancy broadly plateaued before COVID. Not quite the same in Portsmouth, still creeping up very, very marginally, and I think that's probably because we do have gains we can still make on early deaths, so deaths broadly before the age of 75 years. That's the sort of how that measure is defined. A number of things there. So whether that's heart diseases or lung diseases, there are gains that we can still make in Portsmouth. When we're thinking about healthy life expectancy, so the number of years that people live in good health, nationally and also locally, and you may well have seen this being published, that there have been slight sort of reductions in that, and clearly that is something that we need to be focusing on, because it's really important in terms of it's not only the sort of quality of life, but obviously it's making sure that people are living a good length of life, but also living in good quality of life. And we don't want people to live a long time living with ill health, so we want to be squeezing that time that people live in ill health as much as possible. So there are absolutely things that I think we need to be focusing on in Portsmouth to make sure that we do everything we can on that. And I think that comes down to probably some of the same sort of basic things that we already know about. So all of the same things around stopping smoking, tackling obesity, excess alcohol is really important in Portsmouth as well, and at every life stage and at every age group, all the way through. So not just waiting until older age, but actually starting early and keeping that approach going, so that we can really make sure that we're doing as much as we can to reduce those rates of early death from heart disease and cancers and respiratory diseases all the way through. Suicide rate, just to pick up on that, because I think it's actually really, really important, and an area of work that I am involved in. So obviously any death by suicide is one too many, but actually since 2017 in Portsmouth, the rate has been reducing a little bit, which is really great. It's actually by over 10% in that time frame, so it's really good. Clearly there are current circumstances, cost of living, all of these types of things, which may mean that it doesn't stay like that where it is. But obviously we're doing everything we can to make sure that it doesn't increase, and of course we'd like to see it go down even more. So thank you for highlighting that, because I think it is something that we can be proud of in terms of our efforts on that agenda.
I think sometimes we need a national average attached to it as well, and the figures are all there. Sometimes Portsmouth is behind others. When I first started working in the health service, I was told it was all about adding years to life and life to years. And I find that is invariably a good way of looking at, and the most important thing for me on top of that is inequality. And precisely. I don't think that we're doing, and we need to report on all of those three things: years to life, life to years, and inequality. And we have some serious inequalities in this city. And we need to really, that would be my focus. Thank you so much. I didn't want to be too boring about that, but I will keep mentioning it if it doesn't happen.
Thank you. Councillor Anne Briggs.
Thank you, Chairman. Green and healthy city. I lived in Portsmouth for the first 16 years of my life, so I know it well. I know all the very narrow streets which are full of cars. Trees and green are good for people. It's good for their mental health. It's good for the environment. So how are you going to create a green and healthy city? And I know there's lots of problems, and it's probably not a fair question, but people do need to see green. They do need to see trees, and I just don't know how you're going to do it in some areas that really, really could do with it. And what sort of trees would you put in? And to protect them from any vandalism. Probably it's another one of my awkward questions, so sorry about that. But it is important for people.
I think as Portsmouth councils, we probably all aware that that I think last year there were 900 extra trees planted, and for the second year in the row, Portsmouth got a recognition for International Tree City of the Year. I think Claire, it's in the report, isn't it?
Yeah, I have read the report.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And where they've been put, but there must be an awful lot of work to be done to turn it. And great for what you're doing, but people do need more green space. And I know we've got a lovely common, and then at the other end, Hillsy Lido, you can walk around it still. But the people in the middle, Arundel Street and such, because Councillor Smythe can answer my question. See her hand up.
The local plan is the administration and all the political parties working together in Portsmouth are putting together a much greener local plan. We haven't published ours yet, and a lot of the things are about biodiverse corridors, about depaving, about reducing surface water drainage into sewers, which of course is good both for the environment and for the sewers. I think Portsmouth are doing a lot about that, but thank you for reminding us of the importance of absolutely keeping focus on it, because we do live in a dense place, and the less people that put down plastic grass and cut down trees, the better. And I think the council as a whole, it's a cross-party issue. We're all very aware of that.
Okay, thank you.
And just to add, I mean, I think you've all captured it extremely well. So thank you very much for that. But yes, in terms of the benefits to health and well-being, it's clearly physical health in terms of the space to be active, but also mental health and well-being is incredibly important too. And as Councillor Smythe has said, it is about those corridors as well. That is a sort of active area of work in terms of making sure that those green spaces are connected. So not just having isolated pockets of green space, but making sure they are sort of connected across the city as well. I
think there could be more in this about air quality. I mean, that would be an observation I had. There's not enough about air quality, which we now know is extremely damaging to people's long-term development and health, morbidity and mortality. I'd like to see a focus on air quality because we're trying very hard, certainly in my corner of the authority, to reduce traffic and to reduce reliance on the car, because that's the source of pollution, and also pushing forward the idea of shore power for the port, which I've been particularly exercised on. I'd like to see more on air quality from a public health perspective, please.
I'll request that for next time. Thank you, Councillor Smythe. And clearly lots of the work in this space is absolutely in partnership with colleagues across the council in terms of in transport and the regeneration departments as well. And I'll make sure that's included.
Thanks. I think we had a report last year, so it does come. But putting it in regularly would be really good. Councillor Graham Heaney.
I just have one question. It goes back to what Judy was saying about the air quality issue. There's going to be a report going to Traffic and Transportation Cabinet member soon about the clean air zone. But what it's talking about is the outputs, how many vehicles have gone through the zone. It doesn't say anything about whether the zone has made any significant difference to air quality or to levels of pollution. Are we any nearer to getting anything? I did ask this about 8 or 9 months ago, and I was told we needed to wait for longer to test out the outcomes. But are we any nearer to knowing whether this has had any real impact or not?
Councillor Heaney, it's an excellent question. If you don't mind, I'll come back to you on that. That's not an area that I'm directly involved with, and I'm afraid I don't know the latest on exactly that, but I recognise the point you're saying.
Yeah, possibly it's a slightly unfair question because obviously you're not traffic, but I will certainly be asking that question when I get to the traffic meeting. But I think it's something that cross council we do need to be aware of, and I don't know whether they're sharing information about this or not. But if they're not, they should be.
Thank you. Councillor Judith Smythe, did you want to speak, or were you just acknowledging? Yeah. Okay. Are there any more questions for Joe from councillors? Thank you very much, Joe. I should have said that actually all the agenda updates from the various organisations, all the comments and questions made by the officers will be noted and summarised so that we can look at them in the future. So we're coming to the end of the meeting, so I'd like to thank all the members here and all the guests today and the staff and democratic services. The next meeting is scheduled for 21st of September at 1:30. I'm officially closing the meeting and I'm asking Lisa to stop the live stream. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just go and switch it off.